And all the time lapses of people doing this, it makes it look so easy. But in the most awkward squat, holding the ceiling. Everyone's like, so I just threw the ceiling together, it's no problem. My legs aren't sore or anything.
You don't get freedom peacefully. Freedom is never safeguarded peacefully. Anyone who is depriving you of freedom isn't deserving of a peaceful approach by the ones who are being deprived of their freedom. The only way you can get freedom is to get it the same way the white man in this country got it from England, or he says he got it from England. He was willing to pay the price for freedom.
Before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
So, first, my unexplained and just upfront answer, no, he didn't.
So to establish my knowledge of Malcolm X before the last few weeks, it's basically non-existent. I really genuinely don't remember learning about him in school. I remember hearing about him, maybe mentioned when we learned about Martin Luther King. I remember learning a lot about Martin Luther King. So to set the scene, I didn't like Malcolm X. It seemed like all he was in my mind was like a hate monger and this guy who incited violence. And I was like, that doesn't interest me. Especially at the time, I was more, like when I had first heard about Malcolm X, I was more of a pacifist, but more on that later. So coming into the last few weeks, I took a class on Islam and Christian encounters throughout history. And one of the things we talked about was Malcolm X. Of course, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King never really had an interaction. It was a train. I took this class, Islam and Christian encounters, and we started talking about Malcolm X. And I remember what interested me was I actually didn't know a pretty big piece of information, which was that Malcolm X was a Muslim. He started off in what was called the Nation of Islam, which I'll get into a little later, but he eventually became a Muslim in Islam proper and became like an actual straight down the line fundamentalist Muslim. And we read this letter from him. This letter intrigued me so much about him, and I had already heard people talking about his autobiography, and I was like, you know what, I'll give this guy a chance. Like, this letter really captivated me and sounded interesting. So I looked into it, and I found the audiobook, and then I went and watched the movie that Spike Lee did in the 90s called Malcolm X. Hero's a strong word, but I've developed so much respect for him, going from someone who genuinely just was not interested / had negative thoughts about him, to now, whoa, I realize his role and what he did, and that's what I want to get into today.
Starting with Sunday, my initial plan was to get into prayer this week as I kind of re-enter my Christian faith. I used to pray when I was younger, and I'm trying to kind of re-figure out things that I thought I once knew as a Christian. Just because of kind of mind fog and so much homework, this week kind of delayed that. So that will be for another week. First interesting thing that happened was I took an opportunity and went to Dallas with my sister. Totally spontaneously, she just decided she was going to Dallas, and seconds before she went, she was like, do you want to go? And I was like, yeah, I want to go. Can I go? It was still a nice change of pace to go and do that, and I'm glad that vlogging has kind of encouraged me to, hey, I want this video to look interesting. I should push myself to do more interesting things. Side note, this is a new style of vlogging. If you can tell, it sounds more like I'm talking to you guys. That's because I am. So my script now has just bullet points on it. So I'm just like going through the steps of what happened this week and kind of remembering them so I can kind of like experience it with you. So the workout I did on Monday was actually pretty intense because I started swimming last week, and then on Monday I decided to add in running and weightlifting. And it actually like was a really, really good workout. Like it kicked my butt. There's something about getting like a really good sweat on that afterwards you just feel so accomplished. You're just like, I just want to sit in my victory for a minute. Tuesday, I had trouble getting up to my alarm. Struggling with that will be an ongoing goal throughout this week. I think this would be a good opportunity to talk about the Nation of Islam, which is something I brought up earlier. It's a group that was inside of America in the 1950s and 1960s, and it was led by this guy who was like a cult leader named Elijah Muhammad, and he said that he was the last prophet, and it was like a black supremacist group where they all believed that white people were not just below them, but white people were devils, and they would call them the blue-eyed devils. This was the initial way that he was brought into Islam. And so he joined it while he was in prison. When he gets out, he ends up becoming a minister for the Nation of Islam, and he's like full on for this. And this is where like kind of a lot of negative images for Malcolm X came from. So there's one image that he mentions in his book that they also showed in the movie that's like a pretty dramatic and sad image, which is, and he talks about it in the book, like feeling bad about it. He was like, there was this one girl that I gave a talk to at a college. There was this one white girl who was particularly affected by this talk, and afterwards she came up to me and said, like, you know, like, I'm ashamed of what my ancestors did, and I'm not racist, and I'm not, or at least I'm trying not to be racist, and I want to be better, and I want to help other white people to be better. Is there anything that I can do to help forward your movement? And he barely acknowledged her, and when he looked at her, he said, nothing. And then he kept going, just like totally cold. So later on in the day, I took my old camera out of retirement. Wait, it's this camera. This camera right here. It's the Canon Rebel that I had since I was like in middle school. So I like saved up for it when I was in middle school. By the time I got it, it was right before I went to high school. And then I got involved in like all this extracurricular and theater, and I just like didn't really have time for videos. So since I took this camera out of retirement, I started thinking, oh, what else do I need? And so like I'm going through and I'm doing this thing that's, I kind of refer to as like camera porn a little bit. So it's like, I'm just like looking on Amazon at all these accessories, and I'm just kind of getting mesmerized in the idea of what it might be like to have some crazy, ridiculous like rig. It kind of clouds my mind when I look at what you would call camera porn or anything else really, not just camera porn specifically. I hate that word, porn. It's kind of like a coping strategy, like an escapism thing, so I don't have to worry about real life if I'm just like, oh, what should I get next for my camera, or what should I do for this, or what should I do for this, and I'm looking on Amazon or watching videos of people testing out equipment and all this stuff, and it's just like not very productive, but it feels almost like it's productive because it feels like it's headed somewhere, like I'm learning information about stuff, but it really just serves to cloud my mind and keep me distracted from what I really need to be focused on. And then, you know, my workouts were off because I was waking up at weird times, and then also the entire week really was cloudy outside. Like it's still cloudy today. It's been kind of cloudy and foggy and misty, like there's puddles all over the ground. And I can have an appreciation for that kind of weather at certain points in my life, but there are also weeks like this where everything's so cloudy in my head and it's cloudy outside. And it's like, I just need to see some clear blue skies so I can think clearly, you know what I mean? Because when I'm foggy up here and it's foggy out there, it can really like mess with my head. So moving on to Wednesday, I didn't get up at the right time again. I got up at about 9 this time, maybe even 9:30, and the pool closes at 1, and after class, by the time I got to the pool, I got there at like a little before noon, so I had to start with my swim because, you know, I couldn't do the other stuff first because the pool had been closed by then. So I had to start with my swim and get all like chlorined up. I felt gross and exhausted. Like, do you ever have like a day at the pool and you don't shower after the pool? So when you sweat, makes you exhausted. I really don't know how to explain that. Like, maybe that's not relatable, but I just feel like when you have chlorine all over you and you're sweating, it's just like a different level of I need to take a shower and go to sleep. So then later when I was going to do more work on this essay, I started thinking about the way that we look at people throughout history and how we put them on a pedestal.
So Martin Luther King Jr. Day was Monday, 2 days ago. And I've just noticed from all of social media and then from doing my own research on Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. for this essay, and then partly just from my own interest, there's something that happens when people die who had some kind of legacy, is that legacy will morph to fit whoever is in charge and what they want that person to have said. So we know that Martin Luther King Jr. was revered and that people like what he stood for. So people will selectively find quotes from him that doesn't really match his entire doctrine, and they will take it very out of context, like we have no idea how he said it, who he was talking to, or what speech, and then they'll just put it out there. Something he said one time. There's this book I read a while back. It's called Sum, S-U-M, and it's like a book of short stories, and every short story is like a fictitious possible afterlife. And in one of them, it's like the first afterlife is this waiting room, and you stay in that waiting room until your name dies. And so the last time someone ever thinks about you or utters your name or quotes you, the last time that ever happens, then you finally get to go through this mysterious door and see whatever's after that. But there's so many people who are just sitting there in this waiting room and have been sitting there forever, because there are people who didn't really know many people, who have many friends, and they got to go through really fast because, you know, not many people talked about them for that long after they died. Maybe a year or two or a couple years. But you've got people like Shakespeare. So Shakespeare's back there forever because people are still talking about him. Who knows how long they're going to talk about him. You've got George Washington. He's going to be back there for so long. And you realize that, like, the guy who dies and is there, like, the perspective, the storyteller of this story, is talking to these people and saying that they're just kind of frustrated because when they look at the people who are quoting them and referencing them and thinking about them, they're not really thinking about who they were. It's just a name at this point. They're like, what people think I was is so removed from who I really was at the time. And I mean, I've said a lot of things, so even if they use a direct quote, I mean, if I think about things that I've said in my life, what is it that becomes my legacy? You know, like there are times that I thought this way and times that I thought that way. Okay, well, what becomes my legacy? Is it the belief that I held for longer, or is it the belief that I was holding at the moment that I died? You know, so like Malcolm X, he was part of this Nation of Islam cult-like thing, basically. This black nationalist, black supremacist, white people are demons, literally devils, and they know it. And he was in that group for like a long time. And then, like, for a short time before he died, you know, he went to Mecca and then became part of Islam proper and didn't think that. And he realized, oh, that's racist. I shouldn't think that about white people. White people are not all evil. And he changed his mind. Okay, so what becomes his legacy? Is it the belief that we like best? Or is it the belief that he held very last? Or was it the belief he held the longest? I don't know. I don't know the answer to these questions. But so it's like if you found Martin Luther King saying something in a moment of anger or of aggravation, well, what becomes his legacy, and is it up to us to decide that for him?
So after that, I went to class, and then I had 2 assignments and homework that I wanted to talk about because I thought they were interesting. The first one, kind of a small thing, it's called 23 and a half hours, and the idea behind it was we have 24 hours in a day. That's a lot of hours. Can you limit your laziness and doing nothing and sleeping to just 23 and a half hours a day? But that's a lot of time to be lazy. So the second assignment was to watch the inauguration and to kind of reflect on it. And initially when I heard this, I was like, oh, this is so boring, like an inauguration. Like, I don't know that I've ever watched an inauguration before. It's just a guy saying like, hey, I'm gonna be the next president and I promise I'll try to do a good job. I was very happily surprised that I actually really, really enjoyed it for a couple reasons. And what is it? I'm a sucker. I'm a sucker for America. Like, I saw all those American flags up there, and we had the original ones next to the new one. And Lady Gaga comes out and sings this beautiful version of the national anthem. And I'm just sitting there like watching how like happy she is while she's singing this and getting to do this for our country. And just like people being patriotic just like gets me in a good mood. And it was nice to hear people say, let's focus on our next step. Instead of focusing on how bad it is now, let's focus on how much better it's gonna get and how we're gonna get there. So on Wednesday, before I went to bed, I made a commitment to myself. I am making a statement right now. I'm going to get up, and no matter how tired or much I don't want to get up, I'm going to get up. I'm going to turn all the lights on. I'm going to put my clothes on and get out the door. I got up 6:15, turned all the lights on, and then I sat down for a second and watched some YouTube to kind of stimulate my brain, and it worked, but I sat down for like 10 to 15 minutes. So now it's 6:30 and I'm in the car on the way to the gym. I would have liked to ideally get to the gym at 6:30, but leaving at 6:30 is better than getting up at 8:30 and not being able to go to the gym till 9. I feel like this is a win. This is what I said I would do, and I'm doing it. I'm in the car, on the way. It's happening. And then I went to go work out. I had a great workout. And afterwards, there was this guy who had been swimming. He's like, an older guy. And he said he'd been swimming for 60 years. And he was like, did you swim any in high school? And I was like, no, I actually just started last week. And he was like, wow, you look like you've been doing it for a while. Things were starting to look up at this point. So then I went to get coffee and start my new book, which is the book that I will need to finish by the end of February, which is by Dostoevsky. I think I'm saying that right. He wrote Crime and Punishment, but this book is not that. It is Notes from Underground. I bought this one because I found it at the bookstore, and it's been read by, I'm assuming, like a girl in high school or in college that had to read it for something, because all of her comments are like, this book is absurd, I don't understand the metaphor, what the hell is going on in this book? Like, all of her comments are so absurd, and I'm so excited to read along with her and her commentary that she added to it. I'm so excited. So after class, I had time to watch the Malcolm X movie from the 90s that was made by Spike Lee. So what I got from the movie, and then some subsequent interviews I watched with Malcolm X, were a couple things. Was Malcolm X violent? Or did he incite violence? No, I don't think he did. And I think the reason I say that, or I would certainly hesitate to say the word violent, is because what he was talking about was not going out and hurting people. He was just talking about standing strong. It seems like he more wanted to, instead of say, like, hey, all black people go and fight white people because they're horrible, it was more like, hey, we need a backbone because all these white people are taking advantage of us and we're not doing anything about it. And it's just like Rosa Parks, for example. We don't think of her as like violent or rude or like some kind of Karen attitude because she went and was rude to a bus driver. Can you imagine if that was the story? If they were like, well, Rosa Parks was a bit of a Karen. I mean, she was just giving this bus driver a hard time. He was just trying to do his job. And it's like, no, she didn't go looking for trouble. She was in a situation where black people had been oppressed for a long time. White people get on the bus and suddenly these patrons have to go sit in the back after they've paid their money. And she was like, you know what? No, I'm not doing that anymore. I have a background. I'm standing up to you. And this is not going to happen anymore. And I'm like, I see Malcolm X's protest and his philosophy as the same style, as the same kind of, I'm not going to go incite violence, but if you're going to come to me with your violence and your oppression, hey man, I just want you to know, I'm going to fight back. So after the movie and then after class, I went to the library and I was determined to finish all my homework for the weekend, and I did it. So afterwards, I had time to kind of do my own thing. I got to go have dinner with some friends and got to just like hang and watch TV. Friday comes around and the morning problem is back. The alarm goes off at 6:15 and I didn't get up until 9:30. And that's like 9:30 is like when I'm rolling out of bed. I didn't have time to work out because my class was so soon. So I just ended up kind of walking later in the day to burn off some calories. After work, I was determined to get some kind of cool time lapse for this vlog, the one that you saw at the beginning. I had an idea. I knew this building that I could get on top of, but it kind of has this like rickety ladder to get on top of it. And so I'm holding my tripod and like kind of grabbing onto the ladder with one hand. It's very dangerous. I don't recommend it, but I did it and I made it. Be safe up there. Be so safe.
Still up here. It's so beautiful.
My guess is that time lapse will look amazing. If it doesn't, at least I got some experience sneaking around.
So I'd like to point out something about the last few days. So I said it was all cloudy and like very foggy and rainy and misty. But one of the things that was interesting is that most of these days ended the same way, which was with the most beautiful sunset I had ever seen. Like several days in a row were cloudy but ended with these beautiful, and they were all different in their own way. It's not like they all look the same. They were all these different kind of like masterpieces in the sky that I'm just like driving home or I'm at work looking out the window and I'm like, what the heck? Like this is such a beautiful contrast from this day that was so cloudy. And it kind of seemed to tie into two different things. It seemed to tie into this week and how I had such a hard time with my workouts and getting up. And it also seemed to have a connection to the Malcolm X thing. So let me make sense of that. I think sometimes you just kind of have to weather the storm of failure to finally get it right. So there was seeds of me getting it right. On Thursday, I got up like right when my alarm went off, and I'm so proud of that. So I know it's possible. But a lot of this week was just failing and having to like deal with failure and having to deal with discomfort to want to push myself to be better. And also to maybe develop a healthy habit of not being so obsessive with workouts and being so obsessive or punishing myself all the time. Maybe being like, hey, it's okay to be uncomfortable sometimes. It's okay to be like, you know what? Dang, I screwed up. And I gotta live with that today. Quote, "First, I must confess that over the last few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached a regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you and in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who patternistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season." End quote. So, to maybe shock some of you, that was not a quote by Malcolm X. That was a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. First of all, let me say, I've said several times on this vlog, this is not a political vlog. I'm not trying to tell you to vote one way or another, or to protest one way or another, or to believe one way or another. Like, not at all. I'm trying to take lessons that I learned from books or from history and kind of apply them very broadly on the spectrum of life, because I think that's more useful. And I think that will last longer and be a more helpful message altogether. It's very easy for a lot of people to just want to keep the peace. A lot of people get uncomfortable with tension, and they just think, you know what, I would rather just live in this peace, even though it's negative, and even though it's not the way it should be or the way I want it. I just don't want to deal with the tension. So let's just keep it the way it is instead of progressing and getting better, because we all want progress, but we hate change.
All progress comes with discomfort, pain, and tension.
That's what it takes to grow. There's a saying, I want to say by Carl Jung, that says, like, no tree can reach up to heaven unless its roots reach all the way down to hell. Which just means, like, you have to go through darkness to get to the light. The shadow proves the sunshine, which is just like this week with the cloudy days and the beautiful sunsets. It's the darkness that you must get through to reach the other side. I think that was the thing with Malcolm X. I think he was able to bring the discomfort. He was able to, like, embrace the tension of it all and bring forward this contentious and this uncomfortable issue that people had been dealing with for decades. And he was able to bring it to the forefront and say, no, we need to be uncomfortable.
The last thing I want to mention before I go is the letter that Malcolm X wrote from Mecca back to the publications to tell that he had kind of changed his entire philosophy on Islam, but that he still remained a Muslim. It was kind of this beautiful proclamation that, well, first of all, that white people weren't devils, but that also we could live in peace. And I really honestly don't want to say too much about it. It's a beautiful letter. I would read it here, but there's a YouTube video where a guy reads it and does a wonderful, wonderful job with it. So I'm just going to link that below. It's going to be the first thing right in the description. But I highly, highly encourage you to watch it. It was the first thing I heard that really set me on the path to look into Malcolm X. So even if you still have a negative view of Malcolm X at the end of this video, I totally understand. I would just highly, highly encourage you to check out that video. This was a really interesting week. It wasn't always, didn't always feel like the most eventful, but I really am glad for weeks like this, weeks that kind of teach me how to find my peace among what is, the inevitable storm, which I think is kind of what Malcolm X represents. He represents the storm that is necessary, and Martin Luther King is the peace among that storm. I might be just saying things at this point. Anyways, I'll see you guys next week. Don't forget to follow your goals and be at peace. Later, guys.
This place is kind of a wreck.